Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. Pre-Columbian era, before 1499, indigenous peoples of Colombia. Colombia was home to a wide variety of indigenous groups with distinct cultures, languages, and social systems. Four of the most notable pre-Columbian civilizations in Colombia were Muisca civilization, location, high plains of the eastern Andes, primarily around modern-day Bogotá. Society, the Muisca were an advanced agricultural society that developed complex political structures. They were divided into confederations, the Confederation of Bogotá, among others, with a ruler called the Zipa in the southern region, Bogotá, and Zaca in the northern region, Tunja. Economy. The Muisca economy relied heavily on agriculture, particularly the cultivation of maize, potatoes, and coca plants. They were also skilled in gold work. Gold and the legend of El Dorado. The Muisca were renowned for their impressive goldsmithing. The legend of El Dorado, which was the story of a golden city, originated from the Muisca practice of covering their chief in gold dust and sending him on a ritual in the lake of Guatavita. Tairona civilization. Location. The Tairona lived along the Caribbean coast, particularly in the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta region. Architecture. The Tairona are best known for their terraced settlements built on steep mountain slopes, which were incredibly well-planned and sustainable. Their cities were complex with plazas, agricultural terraces, and waterways. Economy. Like the Muisca, they relied on agriculture, but also engaged in fishing, hunting, and trade. They produced gold jewelry and pottery. Quimbaya civilization. Location. The Quimbaya were centered in the region that is now known as the Eje Cafetero, coffee axis, in Colombia. Gold work. The Quimbaya are famous for their craftsmanship in gold, especially the tumbaga alloy, which was a mix of gold and copper. The Papuro Quimbaya, a ceremonial gold object, is one of Colombia's most important archaeological artifacts. Economy and culture. The Quimbaya lived in a semi-nomadic agricultural society that cultivated crops such as maize, beans, and cassava. Nariño culture. Location. Nariño is located in the southwestern part of Colombia, along the borders with Tairona. Ecuador, agriculture and trade. The Nariño people were skilled in agriculture and raised crops like potatoes, quinoa, and barley. They also had a thriving trade network that spanned across the Andes. Contributions of early civilizations. Gold work. Many indigenous groups in Colombia, including the Muisca and Quimbaya, were renowned for their extraordinary goldsmithing. They created intricate jewelry, ceremonial items, and figurines, many of which can still be seen in museums today. Agriculture. Indigenous peoples in Colombia practiced advanced agricultural techniques, including terracing and crop rotation, which allowed them to cultivate in diverse environments, from the high Andes to the Caribbean coast. Architecture. The Tairona's cities and terraces exemplify sustainable and advanced engineering, while the Muisca built sophisticated urban centers with complex political and religious systems. Social organization. Indigenous societies were often hierarchical. For example, the Muisca had a political structure based on confederations, with a high priesthood that controlled religious and political life. The Tairona lived in smaller chiefdoms with a paramount ruler overseeing the social order. Lifestyle and social organization. Lifestyle. Indigenous groups had varying lifestyles depending on their environment. The Muisca and Quimbaya, for example, were sedentary farmers, while the Tairona lived in complex villages with terraced gardens. Many groups engaged in ritualistic ceremonies, particularly those involving their deities and natural elements like the sun, moon, and water. Religion. The religious practices of indigenous cultures often revolved around worshipping nature deities. The Muisca, for example, believed in the Zipa, a sun god, and practiced rituals related to gold. Social hierarchy. Many groups had distinct social classes. The Muisca, for example, had a noble class and priests who held power over the common people. They also had elaborate systems of law and justice. 2. Spanish conquest and colonization, 1499-1810. Arrival of the Spanish, 1499-1519. The Spanish arrived in what is now Colombia in the late 15th century, after Christopher Columbus's voyages to the Americas. Several key explorers were involved. In the conquest of Colombia, Alonso de Ojeda, 1499. First contact. Alonso de Ojeda was the first Spanish explorer to reach Colombia. He arrived on the northern Caribbean coast, exploring parts of what would become Venezuela and Colombia. Ojeda's expeditions along the coastline were the beginning of Spanish interest in the region. Gonzalo Jiménez de Quesada, 1536. Conquest of the Muisca. In 1536, Gonzalo Jiménez de Quesada led an expedition inland, which ultimately Independence movements, 1810-1819. The beginnings of rebellion in 1810. The independence movements in Colombia were part of a broader push for independence across Latin America from Spanish colonial rule. Several key events led to the eventual revolution. The Cry of Independence, El Grito de Independencia. On July 20th, 1810, the people of Bogotá, then part of the Viceroyalty of New Granada, which also included present-day Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, and Panama, rose against Spanish authority. This was sparked by a seemingly minor incident, a dispute over a flower vase between the Spanish and the local elite. It ignited long-simmering frustrations with Spanish rule, including economic exploitation and the denial of political rights. The revolt was not initially aimed at full independence, but rather at limiting Spanish power. However, it quickly escalated into a desire for complete independence, as the event marked the beginning of revolutionary fervor. Early revolutionary movements. After the initial revolt, many other cities in the region began to demand autonomy. Cartagena declared its independence in 1811, and the following years saw the formation of a series of short-lived independent republics, such as the United Provinces of New Granada, despite the continued presence of Spanish forces. Influential leaders. Several key figures played crucial roles in the independence movement, both from Colombia and broader Latin America. Simón Bolívar, known as El Libertador, the Liberator. Bolívar was the most prominent leader in the struggle for independence. Bolívar's vision was to create a unified Latin America, free from Spanish rule. Bolívar led several military campaigns across northern South America, helping liberate Venezuela, Ecuador, and Colombia. His decisive role in Colombia was during the Battle of Boyacá, where he led a crucial victory over Spanish forces in 1819, which paved the way for the creation of Gran Colombia. Francisco de Miranda, a Venezuelan revolutionary who was an early advocate for independence in the region. Although his efforts were not entirely successful, his ideals and actions laid the groundwork for future independence movements. Miranda's dream of uniting Spanish colonies into one independent republic was partly realized by Bolívar. Antonio Nariño. A key figure in the early stages of Colombia's independence, Nariño was an intellectual and politician who translated the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen into Spanish. He played a role in the first uprisings and was instrumental in the fight against Spanish forces. Crispín, José Antonio Galán, and others. Many local figures, including military leaders, participated in the struggle. While Bolívar is the most famous, other leaders, particularly in regional struggles, shaped the course of the war. The Battle of Boyacá, 1819. The Battle of Boyacá on August 7, 1819, was the decisive moment in the Colombian fight for independence. Bolívar's forces, along with local patriot militias, defeated the Spanish army. This victory was critical because it marked the end of Spanish control over the region, leading directly to the establishment of Gran Colombia, a republic that included Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, and Panama. Following this victory, Bolívar's army marched to Bogotá, and the Spanish colonial system began to collapse in the northern territories of South America. Formation of Gran Colombia. In 1819, Bolívar founded the Republic of Gran Colombia, uniting Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, and Panama under one political system. This union, inspired by Bolívar's vision of a united Latin America, was an attempt to replicate the success of other revolutionary republics like the United States. 4. Gran Colombia and Post-Independence Challenges, 1819-1831 formation of Gran Colombia. Gran Colombia was formally established in 1819 after Bolívar's victories. It represented a brief but ambitious effort to create a united, independent Latin America. Bolívar became its first president. the political structure of Gran Colombia was influenced by European republican ideas. Bolívar drafted a constitution for the new republic, which was deeply inspired by the French and American constitutions. The capital of Gran Colombia was Bogotá, but Bolívar's dream of a single Latin American republic faced immense challenges. Challenges to Gran Colombia's unity, geographical and cultural divisions. Gran Colombia was plagued by geographic and cultural divisions. The mountainous terrain and vast distances between regions made communication and governance difficult. Additionally, people in the different regions had distinct cultural identities, with tensions arising between the people of the Andes, e.g., Colombia and Venezuela, and the coastal regions, e.g., Panama and Ecuador. Internal divisions. There were political disagreements within Gran Colombia, especially between Bolívar and his fellow leaders. The internal political strew, the 20th century, violence and progress, 1900-1949, the Colombian Liberal Revolution, 1948. The Liberal Revolution of 1948 was a period of intense violence and political instability. It followed the assassination of Jorge Eliezer Gaitán, a popular liberal leader, which sparked widespread riots and social unrest, known as El Bogotazo. La violencia. In the wake of Gaitán's death, Colombia plunged into a period known as La violencia, a decade-long period of violent political conflict between liberals and conservatives. Over 200,000 people are estimated to have died during this time. Social and political reform. In response to the violence, Colombia began to address issues like land reform, labor rights, and other social issues. These reforms were meant to address the underlying causes of political instability, although their success was mixed. 7. Modern Colombia, 1950s present. The emergence of guerrilla groups. In the second half of the 20th century, Colombia saw the rise of several guerrilla groups, including the FARC, Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, and the ELN, National Liberation Army, inspired by Marxist-Leninist ideology. These groups initially gained support from impoverished rural communities and carried out attacks against the government, military, and civilian targets. Paramilitary forces. In response to guerrilla violence, right-wing paramilitary groups also emerged, adding to the country's social and political turmoil. The war on drugs. The 1980s and 1990s saw Colombia become a key center in the international drug trade, particularly in cocaine. The Medellin cartel, led by Pablo Escobar, became notorious for its power, wealth, and violent tactics. The Colombian government launched an aggressive war on drugs, supported by the U.S. government. Escobar was killed in 1993, but the drug trade remained a significant challenge. Peace process. In recent decades, Colombia has made progress towards peace. The 2016 peace agreement with the FARC was a historic moment in the country's history. FARC members disarmed and transitioned into a political party, although challenges remain, including the rise of new armed groups. Modern economy and international relations. Coffee remains Colombia's largest export, but other industries like tourism, technology, and oil have also grown. Colombia is increasingly recognized on the global stage for its progress in economic growth, stability, and international relations. Visuals, maps, pre-Columbian map of indigenous groups. At the beginning of the video, display a map of Colombia, highlighting the major indigenous groups such as the Muisca, Tairona, Quimbaya, and Nariño. Use vibrant colors or icons to indicate their locations and movements. Spanish conquest. Show a map of Colombia as it was during the Spanish conquest, early 1500s. Highlight key locations where important battles or events took place, e.g., Bogotá, Cartagena, Santa Marta. Gran Colombia and post-independence. When discussing the creation of Gran Colombia, display a map of the Union of Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, and Panama. Then, as the video progresses, show how the region split into individual countries after Gran Colombia's collapse. Political turmoil and the War of 1,000 Days. A map of Colombia highlighting the territories involved in the civil wars, showing key cities like Bogotá, Cali, and Medellin. Indicate important military campaigns or locations where battles were fought. Modern-day Colombia. End with an animated map showing modern Colombia's borders and major cities like Bogotá, Medellín, Cartagena, Cali, and Barranquilla. Pictures of historical figures, indigenous leaders and historical figures. Include images or artistic representations of key indigenous leaders, such as Tupac Amaru II, who influenced uprisings in the region, Antonio Nariño, and Crispin. If available, show artifacts from their time. Simón Bolívar. Show portraits of Simón Bolívar, including well-known images and statues of him throughout Latin America. Also include paintings and images of him during the Battle of Boyacá and at the Congress of Angostura. Other leaders. Feature images of Francisco de Paula Santander, José Antonio Páez, Crisóstomo García, and other key figures during Gran Colombia and post-independence struggles. Key historical events. Battle of Boyacá, 1819. Include artistics, recreations of the Battle of Boyacá, along with maps that highlight the locations of critical moments. Use animations or still images of Bolívar leading his troops in this decisive battle. La Violencia, 1948-1958. Archive footage or photos of the Bogotazo riots, particularly scenes of political unrest and destruction in Bogotá after the assassination of Jorge Eliezer Gaitán. This could also be paired with photos of La Violencia period. Modern Colombia, war on drugs. Show photos or short clips of Pablo Escobar, the Medellín cartel, and the impacts of drug cartels on Colombian society. Interviews or expert commentary. Expert interviews. Historians. If possible, include interviews with historians or academic experts on Colombian history. This can help contextualize the major events of the country's past, e.g., the significance of Simón Bolívar's battles, or the reasons behind the collapse of Gran Colombia. Cultural experts. Include commentary from anthropologists or cultural historians to explain the richness of Colombian indigenous culture, music, and traditions. Modern day. Experts. Add interviews with experts in Colombia's current political or economic scene, such as a scholar of Colombian economics, international relations, or drug policy. Visual integration with interviews. When incorporating expert interviews, use archival footage or images of the historical events being discussed. For instance, if discussing the Battle of Boyacá, show the battlefield, historical images of Bolívar, and archival footage of experts explaining the battle's significance. Conclusion and summary. Wrap up. In the final section, offer a summary of Colombia's journey from its indigenous roots to modern-day challenges and achievements. Reflect on the resilience of the Colombian people and their cultural richness. Final visuals. Show stunning visuals of Colombia today, its cities, festivals, cultural heritage, and beautiful landscapes. Closing music. End with a piece of uplifting cumbia or vallenato music, bringing the video full circle, reflecting Colombia's past and present. Thank you for watching this video.